listening to the Adventure Party for the 4th week of October 2021. This week, we once again delve deep into Gygax's Tome of Wisdom. And by deep, we mean 3 pages. The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and really gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm Warlord Scarr.
I'm Savage Mick. Oh my god, all the bits of me are so old.
Oh, that's entirely appropriate. It's a good thing I brought you along because we need the expert of the aged for this continuing project. Also, I have drunk most of my double Morgan and Coke.
Yikes! I haven't even started on my Dundalk Bay Brewery Malbec, which is hearty stuff, so it's going to get me through this. I hope something has to get me through this. I'm old and decrepit and creaking, and not all the parts are in the right order. Are we describing my current physical condition or the subject of today's podcast?
I think we might be describing both. So, yes, our subject today is a few more pages of Gary Gygax's seminal tome, the original, first edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Dungeon Master's Guide.
Some have described it as the Gilgamesh of gaming, the Beowulf of core books. How would you describe it, Scarr?
It's a bit like Gilgamesh in that all of the tablets have been crushed into powder and thrown around a crater in the middle of the desert for 3,000 years. My general opinion on the book so far is that, yeah, there's an awful lot of very important stuff going on here. It is still all over the place. It is distributed liberally throughout with baffling declarations, timeless wisdom, inspired genius, and rancid terribleness, and not in any particular order. That's sort of why we're kind of going page by page with this.
Yeah. Now, it is, shall we say, conceptually dense in places. And sometimes overlabors things, but I suppose someone had to say it first. We'll get to some of that later. But what I did want to note, I forgot to mention it in our last episode when we started in on the Tome of Gygax and got to the heady heights of the end of page 8. I promise you we'll be picking up the pace a little bit. But the whole book is set in a font that I think is quite delightful. It's called Futura, and it is if you've got a copy of the book to hand or a PDF, go take a look. A lot of the early TSR stuff was set in this, and while what you're reading may sometimes be baffling, it is always, typographically at least, crystal clear. Futura is a beautiful font on the page. It is modern without being harsh. It is rounded without being florid. And I think it serves a textbook very well. We should probably have more textbooks in Futura, please, if you're listening, textbook makers. And I don't know, perhaps it's a little old school for modern RPGs, but I've always found it very pleasant to read. Anyways, Futura, possibly the unsung hero of this tome.
Yeah. If I ever say that this book is hard to read, it is not because of the nature of the text or the layout. It is entirely because what is being conveyed in those letters is, again, conceptually dense to a artistic degree.
Baroque, even.
Yes, that's a good word, Baroque.
Okay, with that out of the way, let's crack into the introduction.
Yeah, this is probably the last section we're going to go literally line by line on, because this particularly is a counterpoint to the preface, which was like literally the last page over. And the ways it both counterpoints and contradicts a lot of what is said in the preface means it warrants some attention.
Can I offer a theory? They say you should always write your introduction last. So there's a very good chance a lot of this text was cobbled together while Mr. Gygax was still mulling certain things over and probably running games. And then he gets to the end, turns back to fill in the last few blank pages at the start, and that's where all the distilled wisdom lands.
Yeah.
But he may have forgotten that previous Gygax had certain other things to say about some of these topics that don't always line up with his conclusions, which are presented first.
Okay, let's just crack into this. Introduction. The format of this book is simple and straightforward. Lie. The first sections pertain to material contained in the player's handbook, and each pertinent section is in corresponding order. Lie. Much information was purposely omitted from the latter work, as it is data which would not normally be known, at least initially, to a person of the nature which this game presupposes, i.e. an adventure in a world of swords and sorcery. Okay, immediately I want to pick that apart. Gygax seems to be married to the concept of traversing a novice, green-thumbed, a completely green rookie going into the dungeon, and everything that they learn and know about dungeoning is learned in the dungeon. Which I feel is one of those things that has been quietly worn away by millions of players over the last 40 years. And the natural desire of someone who is indulging in the fantasy of being a great and powerful wizard is that they sort of already know this stuff, or that they're hardened veteran who has been killing orcs for all the 10 years of campaigning to become a first level fighter, that they should also probably know a little bit about orcs and hobgoblins and such. But Gygax does not seem to think in that headspace. He seems to believe that the entire point of anything that the dungeon master would know needs to be completely separate from what the players know, to the point of apparently removing stuff from the PHB and putting it in the DMG instead.
It's secret information for special people. Dungeon masters.
A little bit, yeah.
You can kind of, from this and the preface, you kind of get the impression that Gygax kind of imagined eventually that there would be DMs worldwide in a fraternity of something like the Magic Circle for magicians. Secret knowledge withheld from the rank and file players who merely ooh and ah as the dungeon master pulls off these spectacles. But he still needed to sell a bunch of books, so
yeah.
How long you keep the lid on that particular circus, history speaks for itself. But yeah, he clearly does not trust players not to use what they know as their characters, and rightly so.
Well, going back to the preface, the not worthy of honourable death line, it is a weird thing to be implying that players must be absolutely isolated from all the DMG knowledge, but also presumably in order to form this magic circle of worldwide DMs, clearly a few players would have to be converted into DMs? When does that, when does that happen?
There'd be a ritual. There's a ritual in the back of the book. Look at it.
Well, we'll get there eventually. We're, at the rate of 8 pages an episode, we'll just be doing this for 30 episodes, so... Anyway.
You wish. What about the knockout rounds? Okay. So, yeah. He's got this vision of what a sort of worldwide network of DMs hoarding their knowledge might look like. I mean, it never came to pass. It's mad. But, yeah, there you go. And he carries on the thoughts, so where are we?
It is incumbent upon all DMs to be thoroughly conversant with the player's handbook, and at the same time you must also know the additional information which is given in this volume, for it rounds out and completes the whole. Just guilt the DM into having to know the PHB back to front, why not? One of those things is perhaps easier to justify when you have written both. Anyway, while players will know that they must decide upon an alignment, for example, you, the DM, will further know that each and every action they take will be mentally recorded by you, and at adventure's end, you will secretly note any player character movement on the alignment graph. Oh yeah, there's a graph, I remember now. I haven't got there yet, it's like page 4 or something.
So much of this does not seem to have survived the passage of history.
No, that's sort of why I'm treating this as more sort of an archaeological thing.
He is a bit of a maniac, isn't he?
Well, yeah, there's a bit of mania in it. All art is done by the insane. But I feel like part of it is Gygax might have put himself under a lot of pressure to make everything in the book important, because otherwise why does it justify the page space? We'll probably be revisiting that point in a minute. I feel like the fact that the alignment was there, and presumably by the point he started writing this book, alignment arguments were already a major problem at conventions that he probably had to defuse with his grandiose vision for the whole thing. which we'll get to eventually. That's a topic. But presumably, everything he's put in here is something that he felt he had to for one reason or another, and that pressure probably compelled him to write in a way which lent everything equal amounts of gravitas.
Which is all the gravitas all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, let's finish this gravimetric first paragraph.
We've got the first paragraph. Here's second paragraph. After the material which pertains directly to the player's handbook comes information which supplements and augments. There is a large section which lists and explains the numerous magical items. There are sections on the development of the campaign milieu, dungeon design, random creation of wilderness and dungeon levels, and the development of non-player characters. In fact, what I have attempted to do is cram everything vital to the game into this book, so that you will be as completely equipped as possible to face the ravenous packs of players lurking in the shadow, waiting to pounce upon the unwary referee and devour him or her at the first opportunity.
It's a very pro-GM book.
Yes, the Dungeon Master's Guide is very pro-Dungeon Master. Funny that.
It's the end of the world. They're out to get you, and you've just got me in this book, buddy. Players. What? Not even once. Without wanting to give away too much, a bit like packing the boot of a car to go on holiday. This book is packed in a similar fashion, and he's not lying. He does appear to try and cram in everything he thinks you might need, but sometimes the oddest places. But we'll get to that, as they keep saying.
Yes. Thus, besides the systems, I have made every effort to give the reasoning and justification for the game. Not for each rule, for the game entire. Of course, the ultimate reason and justification is a playable and interesting game, and how much rationalization can actually go into a fantasy game. There is some, at least, as you will see, for if the game is fantasy, there is a basis for much of what is contained herein, even though it be firmly grounded on worlds of make-believe. It's one of those things that's like, I need to justify everything, but also it's make-believe fantasy, so imagination at the end of the day.
Don't at me, bro.
Yeah. And while there are no optionals for the major systems of advanced D&D, for uniformity of rules and procedures from game to game, campaign to campaign is stressed, there are plenty of areas where your own creativity and imagination are not bounded by the parameters of the game system. These are sections where only a few hints and suggestions are given, and the rest left to the DM.
Good to know that even in the first foundational core book, those elements of, you write it. I couldn't be arsed.
This is the caveat paragraph, I think. There's this like, yeah, you're going to have to make some stuff up, but also here's stuff that can't be changed, but also everything can change. Yeah, well...
yeah, here's the concrete foundations for Castle in the Sky. And if I've missed any of the floors, I meant to, and you should probably fill that in yourself. It's not that important.
We're sounding very mean, but like, I'm not saying that the caveats like this are not required for this kind of book. I'm just not sure that Gygax has put us in the preceding 8.25 pages have not put us in the mood to give him the benefit of the doubt.
I don't know. It kind of forgives an awful lot that I've complained about in every other book. It's like, yeah, if you could drill right down to the fundamentals. The first one was rubbish as well, so yeah. What do you expect? No, it's not. This isn't a rubbish book. I quite like some of this.
Yeah.
So, you're on your own, bucko, but here's plenty of things you'll need.
There is so much that could have been included herein that a major part of authoring this volume was designing what would be omitted. The criterion was usefulness. First came material which was absolutely vital to play. Then came the inclusion of what would be most helpful to you. And finally, interesting items of broad appeal which tend to improve the flavour of a campaign were sifted into the work. Material included was written with an eye towards playability and expedition. The fun of the game is action and drama. The challenge of problem solving is secondary. That's an interesting point considering the OSR and their oft insistence that action is a sign of failure and drama is something for story games and problem solving is the entirety of the game.
Emotions aren't role-playing. Yeah, but if this temple has 3 different coloured lights and 14 different symbols on the floor, that's role-playing. Okay.
More realistic combat systems could certainly have been included here, but they have no real part in the game for a group of players having an exciting adventure. If you will do your best to keep the excitement levels of your games at a peak, you will be doing yourself and your participants a favour which will be evident when players keep coming back for more. The final word, then, is the game. Read how and why the system is as it is. Follow the parameters, then cut portions as needed to maintain excitement. It is interesting though, like, apart from the, actually good advice of, don't use rules you don't really need, it weirds me out that he claims that he has justified all of these rules. And again, I would like to strike that is basically an outright lie. If anything ended up on the ending for, it was probably the justification for a lot of the subsystems that are assigned here. It's just like, you can infer justifications by context and by going through old 2000s forum posts by Gygax, presumably. But I don't really think he has justified everything as well as he would like to claim he has in this introduction.
I do like that line where the rules were sifted into the work, sort of sprinkled throughout as doorstops and hurdles.
Forked in like fertilizer.
Yeah, basically, this is what we'd left. It'll go there, it's fine. Like packing that car boot. Just jam it in somewhere.
For example, the rules call for wandering monsters, but these can be not only irritating, if not deadly, but the appearance of such can actually spoil a game by interfering with an orderly expedition. You have set up an area full of clever tricks and traps, populated with well thought out creature complexes, given clues about it to pique players' interest, and the group has worked hard to supply themselves with everything by way of information and equipment they will need to face and overcome the imagined perils. They are gathered together and eager to spend an enjoyable evening playing their favourite game, with the expectation of going to a new, strange area and doing their best to triumph. They are willing to accept the hazard of the dice, be it loss of items, wounding, insanity, disease, death, as long as the process is exciting. But lo, every time you throw the monster dice, a wandering nasty is indicated, and the party's strength is spent trying to fight their way into the area. Spells expended, battered and wounded. Characters trekked back to their base. Expectations have been dashed, and probably interest too, by random chance. Rather than spoil such an otherwise enjoyable time, omit the wandering monsters indicated by the die. No, don't allow the players to kill them easily or escape unnaturally, for that goes contrary to the major precepts of the game. Wandering monsters, however, are included for two reasons, as is explained in the section about them. If a party deserves to have these species inflicted upon them, that is another matter. But in the example above, it is assumed that they are doing everything possible to travel quickly and quietly to their planned destination. If your work as a DM has been sufficient, the players will have all they can handle upon arrival. So let them get there, give them a chance. The game is the thing, and certain rules can be distorted or disregarded altogether in favour of play. That's a very long-winded reasoning for why you shouldn't always use wandering monsters.
Apparently why he doesn't think they're much cop anyways. So, Gary, why are they in your game, Gary? What's going on?
Well, no, he has two fully printed out justifications for using them in the section on wandering monsters, which is... Hold on, let me check this table of contents again. Money, character spells, adventure...
You do that.
Combat...
The phrase there like creature complexes. And I'm like, is he hinting at sort of dungeon ecology there?
Yes.
Or does that mean something else? Yeah?
No, he's talking about dungeon ecology.
Awesome. Everyone is writing books, talk about more dungeon ecology, or whatever ecology. Magic monster ecology. It's fascinating. And honestly, probably produces more interesting magical monsters than just sticking all the folktales together.
But yes, if I was to put on my OSR hat, I feel like Wandering Monsters is possibly it's an entire episode in itself. I'm actually probably one we've done before.
At the rate we're going, it probably will be. I should note it down, though. Wandering Monsters, good episode title. And okay, so listen, adventurers out there who, having expended a couple of spells and gotten their boots scuffed, decide to go home. The hell with you. There's a little hobbit, Frodo. You might have heard of him. He loses all his mates, loses all his gear, and it ends up with a butler, some saucepans, and a probably cannibalistic guide in the middle of hell. And he still gets the job done. So what's your excuse?
We see previous episode on Half-Done Quests. But yes, it's an interesting paragraph, but I feel like taking it apart would require additional dives into the book.
We need a hoist.
Yes, and a couple of jackhammers. Know the game systems, and you will know how and when to take upon yourself the ultimate power.
Loves GMs. Just GM love.
That's right, the implication of that is, like, you're not supposed to have ultimate power all the time. The part of the trick to being a GM is to know when to have the ultimate power. I'm screaming into the mic, I'm sorry.
Do you see why Jack Chick and Moms Against D&D were frothing when they read this book? Because without context, this guy...
They didn't read this book!
Yeah, but if they had...
I'm not sure they would have been able to read this book. To become the final arbiter, rather than the interpreter of the rules, can be a difficult and demanding task, and it cannot be undertaken lightly, for your players expect to play this game, not one made up on the spot. By the same token, they are playing the game the way you, their DM, imagines and creates it, remembering that the game is greater than its parts, and knowing all the parts, again, guilt, read all the books, know every rule, you will have overcome the greater part of the challenge of being a referee. Being a true DM requires cleverness and imagination, which no set of rulebooks can bestow. Seeing that you were clever enough to buy this volume, and you have enough imagination to desire to become the maker of a fancy world, you are almost there already.
It's like the Atlas method. Are you sick and tired of players kicking sand in your face? Take the Gygax challenge and become the ultimate master of the game.
Yeah, but it's just like, oh, by the way, also congratulations on being smart enough to buy this book.
He knows who he's writing for.
I know he does.
Remember, Gygax was a hype man, remember?
Yeah.
That's why I remember him.
Read and become familiar with the contents of this work and the one written for players. Learn your monsters and spice things up with some pantheons of super powerful beings. Then put your judging and refereeing ability into the creation of your own personal milieu, and you have donned the mantle of Dungeon Master. Welcome to the exalted ranks of the overworked and harassed, whose cleverness and imagination are all too often unappreciated by cloddish characters whose only thought in life is to loot, pillage, slay, and who have failed to appreciate the hours of preparation which went into the creation of what they aim to destroy as cheaply and quickly as possible.
Congratulations, idiot.
You're so smart, you bought this book, and now you're trapped. I feel like Gygax, they have not just been the first Dungeon Master, but possibly the first forever DM. Which is weird, because like most of the rest of the TSR people did run their own games, in the early days at least.
Do you imagine they're up to Gary's standards?
I don't know, and I don't know.
Sometimes you make yourself the forever DM by being too impressed with your own abilities. Okay.
Here's a classic line upcoming. As a DM, you must live by the immortal words of the sage who said, "Never give a sucker an even break." Also, don't be a sucker for your players, as you'd better be sure they follow sage advice too. As a DM, you have to prove in every game that you are still the best. This book is dedicated to helping ensure that you are.
It's a nasty Hobbesian world of you versus them. The adversarial GM is born and reified in this intro. Bloody hell. Thanks, Gary. That helped a lot. I mean it.
I'd imagine Gary was trying to be sarcastic or sardonic or something here, but again, I think he assumed that the people who were going to buy this book were people who were, mid-20-somethings who had a bit of GM under the belt and needed the push over the edge, as opposed to the legions of 13-year-olds who bought this specifically because they didn't want the basic D&D for babies. They were big boys now and they needed the advanced stuff, and who would then read this paragraph and probably a couple of pages up further on before getting bored and just buying adventures. And they would read this and absorb that information. And that is not information you want to be feeding to 13-year-olds.
Are you making the argument that this is all kind of a put on?
Not all of it, but
He reads a little like Nietzsche. Nietzsche, I think, is very, very sarcastic and quite funny. And some of this, yeah, if what you're saying is true, then yes, turn this on its head. And really the lie of it is given there in the last paragraph. He's accepted. You're incredible. You're amazing. You idiot. You've fallen for my trap. Never give the players an inch. We'll show them we are the best. It's real Ubermensch stuff there. But Nietzsche kind of, I thoroughly believe, had his tongue in his cheek most of the time. Right, so that's the intro.
yeah. Now we can get on. Now the next section is the game. So now we can finally start the game.
And this is a doozy. So there's art sprinkled throughout the book, and most of it is for setting the tone. But the next two pictorial elements, let's call them, are entirely about mechanics. And yeah, so the game.
We're not going to be going line by line here, but it is interesting to just note the next few pictures. Because the first picture after the constipated unicorn is a picture of the 5 different kinds of dice. 5, you say?
Yep, there's only 5. 5, yeah. Platonic solids.
Yes.
Of which there are 5.
Exactly.
5 is their number.
The D4, D6, D8, D12, and D20.
Yep. That's the ones I use to play D&D. What ones do you use? Hold on a second, I'm looking at this picture. And, like, pre-desktop publishing, there were lots of things you'd kind of have to do with images to sort of get things to stick. If you look at Gygax's signature at the end of the forward, it's a nasty Xerox. And that was kind of the level you were working at. The spacing of these dice seems a little odd.
Yeah.
Did the D10 exist, but got excised from this for some reason?
It's weird, yeah. There's a very weird gap where it looks like the D12 was just taking like a step to the right to fill in.
Oh, almost if it's filling in.
Yeah, it's an odd one. Because I'm pretty sure it does at some point in the next half page explain that there is such a thing as a D10, but what that actually is a D20, where you ignore the digit, essentially, and just, basically it's 2 D10s in one. It does actually mention non-platonic solid-shaped dice are available in some places. The most common of these is a 10-sided dice, numbered 0 to 9. As with the D20, this can be used for many purposes, even replacing the D20 if a second die is used in conjunction to get 5% interval curves, 1 to 20.
This stuff gets pretty dry and pretty number heavy.
Also, the number can give 0 to 9 linear curve random numbers as the D20 can. So, there's dedicated paragraphs here to explain how to use a D20 as a D20 and as a D10.
Sure, at length, just in case but no more diagrams. No, we're going to do this all.
But there is the main other diagram. There is a fully.
Before we ring that bell, I just want to jump back just ever so slightly. I was scanning the dice and something caught my eye. As a realistic simulation of things from the realm of make-believe, or even as a reflection of medieval or ancient warfare, our culture, our society, D&D can only be deemed a dismal failure. He said it. I've been making this point for quite some time. This system is not for simulation.
Mm-hmm.
It's for telling stories. And there it is. And he was damn right. He continues to be right. Everyone else can get in the sea. Okay, the bell curve?
Yes, so at the top of page 10 is a attempt to explain linear probabilities, which I'm not sure is anything more than a couple of lines. Presumably this made sense in some other older math.
I get it.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm not a STEM kid, but I get it. This is a sort of a checkpoint to make sure you got enough math to play D&D.
Yes, but the main thing here is a bell curve showing what a 3d6 looks like in terms of probability, clearly marking out the 9 to 12 sweet spot range at the 12, the probability of a given integer appearing percentage. So the 12% chance of getting a 9, 10, 11, or 12, and then the fall off for all the others.
I like how the curve also has 13 displayed, but the bell, the round of the curve does not reach it. But I feel like A young Owen looked at that and went, I can get there. The system breaker, there's the hill the system breaker must climb and then jump off the top of. It's like, no, 13, you can't roll 13. Don't try me. So the next half a page is basically, I won't say it's math, it's a very dry summation of all the different things that can happen on a dice. And here's the notation we'll use. This is, I mean, if we say 2d6, everybody understands that now. Everyone who's listened to this understands it. Because it's just part of the grammar. But if you're picking it up for the first time, someone has to explain that the 2 at the front means this, and the D means this, and the 10 at the back means this, 6. Like, someone had to go and write it down. Which is why I love looking at this, because this is, one of the first times it happens, and it happens here. This is where he decides to lay out the maths and the notation. Then we get into cards for some reason.
He has dice that has like card faces on for some reason, and he's just saying, you can make up reasons to use that weird dice that you'd always loved but never had a chance to use.
There's something to ponder. Alright, we're done pondering.
The next half page I find very interesting because it's about miniatures, how to buy them, and who should buy them for whom.
Oh no.
Because we thought Gygax had been setting up the great GM traditions of, adversarial GMing and GM as ultimate arbiter. He's also taking the time to set out the tradition of the GM who makes the players pay for all of his stuff.
Ask grass or cash, no one plays for free. A phrase that would have been perfectly understood in its time. It's like, possibly unfortunately lost now.
This goes to the point where he includes the address for TSR.
It's P.O. Box, folks. Let's send the postcards.
He's got a P.O. Box for TSR on page 11 of the DMG so that you could order Dragon Magazine and get a catalogue of miniatures that you can then convince your players to buy for you because they're the ones using them, right? It's for their enjoyment that you have all the orcs and knights that you could need for your grand milieu. And presumably, you pay for your own copies of Dragon Magazine, but I don't know with this.
There's so many interesting things in this section. He talks about HO scale and kind of how he settled on the scale he uses on the table. And it comes down to like the practicalities of putting figures down. And it's sort of 10-inch wide scale corridors, 3 actual inches in width. And keeps showing us 3 separate squares. Oh no, hold on a second. 10 feet is 3 squares? That doesn't seem right, does it? Look how far we've fallen. Look how far we've strayed from the golden truth. Of course, everyone who plays D&D asks them how wide is a square that's, say, 5 feet. How wide is a 2 square corridor? It's 10 feet wide. How many characters can stand abreast in a 2 square corridor? 2. It seems that we've lost something in translation.
Well, it's quite possible that because there's a lot less hirelings and henchmen around in parties these days, that there just isn't enough room for three people in a party making the shield wall.
That's a good point. I still think that's really interesting. It undermines everything we thought we knew about D&D terrain.
But like that's his skill. But like I'm almost certain that even early adventures, which I have a few of, were still on even some of Gygax's own. Like I could grab my copy of Keep on the Borderlands. I'm pretty sure the reproduction it's actually 10 feet squares. Never mind. The master maps are in 10 feet squares. That's right. So presumably you are supposed to, when you're making your zoomed in map, as a GM, you're supposed to cut all these squares into 3s or 9s, I suppose.
3 abreast, yeah. Wow, it's just like every single D&D dungeon or corridor I've ever been in has just been flipped on its head. This is nuts. Okay, sorry.
Do you want to get to the really cool and controversial part of page 11?
No, we're probably not going to get past... We're not going to do character creation, are we? It's too late.
Fortunately, just getting the introduction through. We leave off at the address for TSR periodicals.
It's not the only address given, but it's the only one that's given enough space to look like an address that you'd put in an envelope. He also references places in England. So you've got TSR for Great Britain, you've got the Judges Guild, and...
yeah, those are the main ones. He does actually mention White Dwarf, which is really interesting.
Well, at the time, they were in partnership.
Yeah.
Because Games Workshop was publishing TSR material in the UK, if I recall correctly.
That's exactly right.
Hands across the water.
Exactly. But yeah, folks, we're going to have to leave off here, it seems. We have rambled a bit. Much like the material that we're covering, we have rambled a bit.
Oh, the maxims don't stop, though. Hold on. So when he talks about figures, he recommends Grenadier models. We'll find out if they're still a going concern. These figures are the only ones which comply in all respects to AD&D specifications and the AD&D Monster Manual. So there you go. There's one true way.
Oh yeah, sorry, we'll leave off with the wording. A word of warning. Many products might purport to be satisfactory for use with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but only those noted as official or authorized AD&D items should be accepted. Do not settle for substitutes or second-hand material in your campaign. Ask for approved AD&D products only.
Brilliant. Accept no substitutes.
Except no substitutes. This is the real stuff, guys.
Love it. I've got to rethink all my dungeon terrain. And now that I think it all becomes 50% bigger, which is a very good reason for why no one ever did it. It's going to be massive. Especially if we consider the size of dungeons back then.
Yeah. But yeah, folks, we're going to leave off halfway through page 11. So we've gotten 2.5 pages today.
But we got to double digits. Don't look at the quantity, look at the quality. For goodness sake.
Next time we have an all new definition of quality as we begin the character creation section, which, yes, is not in the PHB. And yes, this book came out like a year and a half after the PHB, so presumably people had already started their AD&D campaigns without knowing how to roll to create their characters.
They use D&D characters.
Presumably. They had to use original D&D.
They get a big upgrade.
Yeah.
But also, death and disease come stalking.
Oh, yes.
We'll talk about that in the next episode.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the fire's getting low. The wing-back leather chairs are creaking. And the decanter's mysteriously emptied itself. So, thank you for joining us again as we ramble through the Tome of Gygax. Have we decided on a name for the series yet?
I think Tome of Gygax is fine.
Tome of Gygax? Love it. Tome of Gygax. We might put a parenthesis, DMG. Tomes of Gygax? DMG?
Tome is fine.
The Reckoning? Ampersand?
Let's not indulge the man too much.
Okay. The One True Way, Part 1. Thanks for joining us, folks. I'm Savage Mick.
I'm Warlord Scarr.
And this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.
I had no idea 10-foot corridors were 3 squares wide. That's actually nuts. How that got changed or when that got changed. Because it's always like, well, this is the way we've always done it. Is it now? Let's go back and have a look, shall we? And see if we actually always did it that way. Oh, boy. 3.5 linear foot squares. Okay, that's got to be easy. It supports the constant sort of tolling the bell you hear from people who say, oh, D&D is dumbed down, D&D is dumbed down, oh, they're dumbing it down again. Presumably they're thinking about the time when they measured half feet for their squares. It's like, oh, kids today, fractions, what are those even?